right, everybody. Good evening. How are you this evening? I am Anthony Marone coming to you live from beautiful, not so sunny anymore, downtown Syracuse. Live from the Marone Law Firm. We are live with you on Facebook and YouTube. And if you're watching us on replay, welcome in. My name is Anthony Marone. I am the founder and CEO of the Marone Law Firm. Here with you tonight to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is 4 things your parents need to hear. So if you have aging parents or grandparents or loved ones, or if you yourself are in your retirement years and you're looking for, some of the best practices or tips and tricks for how to age gracefully and thrive in your retirement years, and also work with your family or kids on a plan to make sure you've got everything in place that you need, then you are in the right spot here tonight for that conversation. At any time, if you want, you could drop a comment. If you're watching us live on Facebook or YouTube, drop a comment, and we're going to have an interactive question and answer session at the end of the program. So if there's anything that pops into your head that you want to jot down or type in as a question, or you just want to say hi, feel free to do it, and we'll bring all those comments in at the end of our program. But we've got a jam-packed schedule tonight, so I want to get right to it. Our first topic is, how do you get started? What is the way that you kind of set the stage with loved ones in terms of figuring out, how do we have this conversation? We're getting into the holiday time here, right? We're nearly at the end of September, according to my calendar. And soon enough, we'll be into Halloween, and then the holidays are just around the corner. So as you convene with your family this year and you gather around the table, or you travel and you start to see your parents and grandparents, how do you begin to have these conversations? What are some of the things that you'd want to be talking about, and how would you approach it? Because it's not easy. Let's recognize it's not easy for you, and it's not easy for them to be having these conversations. So certainly what we want to do is follow, and like any lawyer, I said there's 4 things your parents need to hear. We're going to start right away with 10. One of them is, the first one is our 10 tips to get started. So these are just 10 quick tips and tricks for you to kind of center yourself and figure out how to approach this conversation, because it's not something that's natural, especially if you're the child approaching your parents. You're potentially encountering a little bit of a role reversal here, because you're going to be, at least temporarily placing yourself in the position, and maybe ultimately being in the position of having to kind of help your parents through some of this stuff. So one thing we want to do is start early. Like, one of the for sure best outcomes for folks is to try to have these conversations with your parents before they're in a crisis. Like, you don't want to wait until mom or dad has fallen down the stairs in January, or has fallen on the ice in February and is in the hospital, to ask them if they've done any planning, any will, power of attorney, or healthcare proxy. You want it to be something that you start, as soon as they're in retirement years and you feel comfortable having this type of conversation. But one thing you have to keep in mind is that you have to exercise patience. You have to make sure that, you're not, it's not an accusatory type of environment with your parents, that you're exercising as much patience as you possibly can given the situation. Hopefully you're in a situation where you started early enough so that that's pretty easy. Choose the right conditions. This is one thing, a lot of kids travel back in, adult kids travel back into town for Thanksgiving, and then they bring this up around a crowded family Thanksgiving table. And that's probably not the right time and place for that conversation. Certainly while you're in town as part of your travels for the holidays, a lot of these conversations take place, but you want to do it in a quiet time where your loved one is secure, where they're not potentially distracted by other things, and where they won't be embarrassed by any of this type of questions, because it's not meant to be confrontational. Involve your siblings. If you have siblings, make sure you've done your homework. And we're going to talk and kind of lay the foundation for that tonight. So consider watching the rest of this session to be your homework. Involve your siblings. Certainly if you have siblings and they're around, you want all hands on deck for this type of situation. Just kind of will work out better with your parents, and then also ultimately with your siblings. The big thing, the next 2 are huge, really, and tie together. Converse with empathy, which is different than sympathy, right? So, empathy, I see you, like, it's not, you're not taking pity on your parents if they're in a tough situation, but you're recognizing them and letting them know that you see them and respect them for all that they've given to you. And then listening, it dovetails with empathy very nicely. You want to make sure that you approach this and that you're doing more listening than speaking. I find that to always be a good way to achieve a positive outcome in a difficult conversation. Spend more time listening, less time speaking. You want to avoid pressuring them. So it's not going to be this thing where you put on a full court press and you're cross-examining them about whether or not they've got a plan in place. You want to simply acknowledge what they've done for you in your life, acknowledge how they've always kind of set you on, even if they haven't, set you on the right path and helped you throughout your young life and adult life. And we're going to avoid pressuring them through this. If they haven't done any planning, it's okay. We can get help. We could seek out professional help, whatever that looks like, to kind of ease us through that step. And then if they have done some planning and you get into it and you're engaging with them on this topic and they're open with you, take notes, to the extent that they'll allow you to do it. Write stuff down so that if and when, or really when, you're called upon to need this information in the future when something happens to them, you're ready and willing and you can reflect and refer back to those notes. So that's really number one, is getting ourselves oriented in terms of, what are some strategies, what are some tips and tricks and best practices to kind of pave the road forward here. Now, as we segue and move into really the meat of these conversations, you're practicing empathy, you're listening. What is the subject matter? Like, what are the things that we actually need to be speaking about in order to have this be a successful outcome with our parents? And so one of them is, what I always call the crystal ball, or I'll often say with clients, if I had a crystal ball, I would do this. As we're talking about aging, particularly as we're talking about whether or not someone will need care later in life, whether that's care in their own home or in an assisted living facility or some type of nursing home. I'm constantly referring to this. If I had a crystal ball, here's how I would proceed. Now we don't, right? We don't have a crystal ball. It would be nice to have a crystal ball, certainly. But one of the things that we have to really acknowledge is that in the long-term care context, so for I have, clients that are 65 and older, half of them will need some kind of long-term care, whether that's care in their own home, independent living in a senior community, or assisted living or nursing home care. Half of those folks that are 65 and older will require that at some point during their lifetime. So, against that backdrop, one of the things we want to talk about with our aging parents is how do we want to navigate that? What are your preferences? I usually start from a baseline preference that every person wants to stay in their own home for as long as possible. I've only ever had one client who was jumping at the opportunity to move into a nursing home, an older gentleman, and he said, "Anthony, I'm a guy, look how many ladies there are at this facility. Ha ha ha, I'll do great." He was the one and only, and he allowed me to use that joke, the one and only that ever was really chomping at the bit. So start from the premise that everyone wants to stay home. I find that to be almost universally true. Although we see, you read the newspaper, if you're in this space, you see nursing homes are all basically filled or mostly full. So where the reality meets what people want is that these facilities have folks in them. So we need to plan for that possibility. And part of the planning, now I am downtown, my office is in downtown, so we'll hear occasional traffic going by. Part of the planning is financial, right? Part of it is, how do we approach this from a financial perspective? Another part, a whole separate other part that we won't talk about tonight is just the social, emotional, geographic placement type stuff. But focusing on the financial and legal planning, which is where my background is, certainly the part that I'm equipped to help you through. One of the things we think about and worry about is, how do we pay for this? How are we going to pay for this? Nursing home care in almost every facility in Syracuse right now is more than $15,000 per month. Okay? $15,000 per month, more than $500 per day, some places more than $600 per day. and not always necessarily the nicest places. The ones you read about in the newspaper of having bad incidents happen at them often tend to be the most expensive. So there's a disconnect on a value versus what you receive type front. But how do we pay for this generically? Well, in the United States, according to the Department of Health and Human Services, this is how we split up this pie. Medicare, which is your health insurance when you're 65 or older, okay, Medicare, pays for about 10% of that coverage. So what that means is Medicare, like let's say you fall and go to the hospital, and you're in the hospital for a few days, you broke your leg or you broke your knee, and then you go to a nursing home. Medicare, your health insurance, will generally cover rehab for up to 100 days. Up to 100 days, not a guarantee of 100 days. So that's just a little over 3 months of potential, and I can't stress that enough, potential rehab coverage. Most people don't get the full 100 days. Medicare stops paying short of that. So that covers your Medicare small sliver of 10%. Skipping ahead, other public, which is like if there's very limited like VA type facilities for some folks, none around central New York, that will take long-term care patients. Out of pocket, 52%. So more than half of the long-term care costs in this country paid for out of pocket. That's primarily where you see a lot of folks doing assisted living or care in their own home. They're paying for that care out of pocket. Private insurance, 3%. Now, this does not mean health insurance. Almost no health insurance coverage for long-term care in America. What they're referring to is what's called long-term care insurance, which is where you've gone out and bought a separate product to cover you specifically for that long-term care. And again, that's a very small percentage of the overall pie. And then jumping back up to the second on the list, you got Medicaid covering just over 1/3 of all long-term care in this country. So the question is, if I'm someone who thinks I'm going to need long-term care and wants to position myself to do that, that's going to be about 1/3 of the people that are going to need long-term care in this country. So it's a huge piece of the pie. That and out-of-pocket combines for over 8 out of 10 dollars that are spent on long-term care in this country. So almost no insurance coverage, private health insurance or Medicare, for extended long-term care beyond that initial rehab in a facility. So if I could look into a crystal ball with my loved one, the way I would kind of be orienting this initial part of the conversation is just, what would you want? Obviously, we think most folks are going to want to stay home. What would you want that to look like? How comfortable are you with someone coming in to help you if that's needed? How comfortable are you going to be, when push comes to shove, if we're talking, depleting your retirement to bring someone in to keep you here just because that's what you said you wanted to stay here versus, potentially moving to an assisted living community, which may be cheaper than care in your own home and may, deplete your life savings at a slower rate, which would give you more time, to receive that care. That's the beginning of that conversation, which is we don't have a crystal ball, Mom. So I don't know how it's going to go. And I recognize and I see and I appreciate that you want to stay here and I want to keep you in your home for as long as we can. Let's talk about what happens if we can't do that, because we're not going to be able to control every single variable in this equation. Okay, so in that frame of mind, what we're looking at next is, the number 3 thing you want your parents to hear is, well, what's the best thing you could do if you're the parent, or the best thing you can ask your parents for if you're the child, to help prepare for that, to help prepare for the fact that we don't know what the crystal ball is going to show us. We don't know how everything is going to unfold in the future. And I think one of the best things you can give to your family in this arena, like if we're talking about preparing them, and having this be something that we work through together, one of the best things you could do is what we call getting your affairs in order, right? You'll hear someone say, I got to get my affairs in order. And it's usually around the time of like some kind of drama or trauma, right? Like something bad has happened. This person has a terminal diagnosis. They need to get their affairs in order. But we're talking about much more proactive and earlier on early in retirement, kind of the best time to do this, getting ourselves organized, organizing things for our family members. And that includes, frankly, not just your kids. I'm talking about, people organizing this for their significant other. I have so many clients where something happens to one spouse and they're incapacitated or they pass away, and then the other spouse is just completely clueless about all of the things, financial, bill paying, emotional, all kinds of things, because, I'm been married a long time now. You have a division of labor, right, in your marriage. My wife takes care of some things, I take care of some things. If something were to happen to me tomorrow and I have not left some kind of written plan, that knowledge of how to do some of those things is going to be lost with me. So when we talk about getting our affairs in order, we actually are talking about much more than just like signing a will, okay? Studies show that families have far better emotional outcomes when the adult children are following a plan set in place by the parents rather than inventing their own plan. Again, if you're the parent, this is just a next step in parenting your children. Rather than have your kids have to come in and design this thing from scratch, not knowing what you wanted, or not having any written plan, so we kind of would let the state dictate what happens to you, why not have a plan in place now while you have control and can lay things out for your kids? This is how I want all these things to be handled. Think about when your kids were little. I've got little kids. I've got a 6-year-old and a few older boys. I don't let the kids decide what I'm going to do now. I don't ask my 6-year-old, should daddy go to work today? Because he'd always say, no, stay home and play with me. It is the obligation, I think, of the parent to kind of set the stage for this. And I know it's not comfortable. I do this for a living. I talk about these issues for a living. It's what I've done for, a decade and a half of my professional life. And for me, it's part of the, this is part of it. Like, I'm used to it. I'm comfortable with it. It's not that way for everyone. Aging in America is not talked about the way it should be. Particularly with the amount of people we have retiring on a daily basis, we're not paying enough attention to this. And so we're having to deal with that crisis on the back end. Because we're not talking about it and planning for it, we have nursing homes like the one up the road from my office here that literally has people jumping out of the window or people disappearing. And then the state has to come in and try to figure out what happened. Well, what's happened by and large is that we're not talking about these things. And so talking about it in a very microcosm type way with your kids will help you at least have a better outcome. This involves a few things. It involves estate planning, which we'll talk about, and what that means, and the documents that are associated with that. But it for sure involves financial preparedness. And that doesn't mean you have to be super wealthy. What we mean is that you've paid attention to, being organized, not having 97 different bank accounts for your kids to have to go chase and organize, not having 30 things at unclaimed funds for them to have to go track down every $70 check that you never cashed that goes to the state of New York, and we've got to track it down now. Not having a million savings bonds that need to be redeemed, aren't earning any more interest, and you've just got sitting in a safety deposit box somewhere. Financial preparedness. And then healthcare decision making. Having that, not only the legal part of that set up, like the legal document that we'll talk about, but also having some kind of conversation with your kids about whether you'd want to be on a ventilator, whether you'd want to have to live on IV and artificial nutrition. Just at least some conversation and recognition that that's something that's important and that we value and that we're going to talk about together as a family, me as the parent, you as the child. And so, this is what we just all covered here. This is the best gift you can give to your kids, in my opinion, as you get older, right? I've got enough stuff. I don't need more stuff, Mom and Dad. I'm very happy that you want to give me Grandma's, china or some rug or some, family heirloom I love. But I'd much rather have an organized plan so that if and when we get into crisis as a family, when you're not with your full faculties, I'll have a plan that I can follow that will help make it as easy as possible. Because you're already talking about a time where there will be trauma, right? And sadness potentially if someone's died. Or in a nursing home, there's a certain amount of grief that goes with having to move a parent into a nursing home most of the time. So this will certainly help with that, having that conversation. And then, we get to the legal part. This is the part where I step in. Estate planning. And what we mean by estate planning, it's really 3 documents that everyone needs. Healthcare proxy, which is someone going to make medical decisions for you if you're unable to speak for yourself. We also use this to authorize organ donation, which is a nice little perk. Power of attorney, which is authorizing someone to make financial decisions for you to pay your bills if you're incapacitated. So these first 2 documents, healthcare proxy, power of attorney, these apply when you're alive. But you sign them now, right? You want to sign these 2 now. And then a will or trust, or will and trust, is going to take effect after you die, typically. Who's going to inherit from you when you pass away, and then who's in charge of that. And then we get into special situations, people with special needs. If you've got young kids or grandkids, there's a whole other level of potential conversation there. But this is what I sit down with folks and go over. Like if we're doing estate planning and someone has nothing, none of these documents in place, this is where we start, because for us, these are the 3 documents that most adults need in the state of New York. And if I have this in place, then the rest I can manage through. Sure, we'd want someone to fill out where all the bank accounts are and have that set up for the kids to access and be able to access their parents' passwords and stuff like that. But this is the basic. I need these 3 things in place. If I have these 3 things, then I can take it to the next level. And this will help your like me as the advisor, or group of advisors that are helping your kids. This is going to help us tremendously. The last thing is, how do we have our cake and eat it too? And really, this is kind of that next level. So if we've established the 3 basic estate planning documents, we're speaking with our parents from a place of empathy, and we're listening, and we're being open and honest about what we would want long-term care needs to look like. And we've done our basic planning. How do we take it to the next level? Topic near and dear to my heart. How do we have our cake and eat it too? I'm super interested in having my cake and eating it too. So this is specifically where we get into, okay, if someone needs long-term care, whether that's nursing home, assisted living facility, or any kind of care, how do I avoid going broke to pay for that? We've already talked that it's about $15,000 or more per month in Syracuse today. Now, the rules for long-term care have changed dramatically. So what this means is, if you need assisted living care, this planning has to be done 2.5 years before you need that type of care. And that's going to go into effect in the spring, which means we can't just have someone who needs to go into a nursing home in October or an assisted living facility in October do this planning today. It won't work. It's got to have to be 2.5 years before. 5 years is still the platinum rule if you need nursing home care. So we get 2.5 years for assisted living, 5 years for nursing home, which is a next level, more intense type of care. So what are we talking about specifically? Sometimes we call this an income-only trust. So we're talking about a legal document, what I call a Medicaid qualifying trust or a family protection trust, where the parent is putting something like their home or life insurance or some kind of investments into this trust to become the owner of those assets. The trust would become the owner. Designed so that if the parent ever needs long-term care, the government cannot force you to liquidate those assets to pay for your care. Parents can be in charge. They don't have to give up total control. But we need to make sure that we've got a plan in this document for the kids to take over if need be. The big part that's scary for a lot of people is that this is irrevocable. That doesn't mean it can't be changed. It can certainly be changed, and there's loopholes to change it. but it has to be irrevocable on the actual face of the document, on the name. Getting into the nitty-gritty, you can't access principal, which means if I put a $100,000 bank account into the trust, I can't just go withdraw the $100,000 next month and spend it. There's a way to make that distribution if you need the money to your kids or grandkids, but you're giving up that right to go and access that money directly. One thing that I like about this type of planning, family protection trust, is that when someone passes away, anything that trust owns will be distributed without needing to go to court. So there's no need for the process known as probate for the assets that are in this trust. It's a nice silver lining. And again, we could do another seminar, and if people are interested, I'm willing to do it, just on the trust itself. But this is where you want to position your parents, is to eventually get to the point where we're talking about the actual plan that's in place for long-term care, and it 90 times out of 100 is going to be this family protection trust. Feel free to leave any comments or questions or concerns or topics that you'd like addressed in the comment section. Happy to answer any questions if you've got them, or if you just want to say hello, you could do that too. The irrevocable trust has some tools built into it that makes it easy to get rid of if you need to. So we can actually get rid of it even though it's irrevocable. And it can be easier to resolve disputes among beneficiaries. So if you have kids that are fighting or loved ones that are feuding over money, we build in some tools to the trust to help us out. Now that's an irrevocable trust, which we'll use often in a long-term care planning setting where we're worried about the cost of care. That's different than what's called a revocable trust, which you'll see some lawyers do. We tend not to do too many of them. The revocable trust is only going to be a substitute for your last will and testament. So the revocable trust acts as a substitute for the last will and testament. It's not going to get you any asset protection planning in terms of, protecting your assets if you need long-term care. And if you're watching on replay and you have questions, feel free to email me or just drop a question here and it'll pop up at least on the YouTube replay of the video. I want to mention now, before we sign off for the evening, that we're having a fall giveaway. You'll see this live on our Facebook page if you're on Facebook. Fall for us and our family is an extremely busy time. And if you're anything like me or my wife, we're relying even more on the slow cooker than we ever have, especially over the summer where we tend to grill more. So next week, we're going to do a very fun live drawing of my personal slow cooker that we prefer in our house, which is the all-clad stainless steel. But it's not enough to give away one. We're going to make 5 lucky winners, recipients of this very nice all stainless steel slow cooker. We have a question from Justin Meyer. Let's go back. Justin says, what level of assets do you need to create an irrevocable trust? It's a really good question, Justin. Thank you. I would say for most people, once you have a house in central New York, that's typically enough to at least consider the creation of an irrevocable trust. It's usually good benchmark is $100,000, like a house worth $100,000 or $100,000 in other assets. It's worth having that conversation. And then certainly the higher up you get, kind of up to the like 5 million mark, if you're up in that level, it still will make sense for you. So the range is huge and will cover many people. So you do not have to be super wealthy in order to have this kind of trust at all. That's a great question though. Thank you. And then Cindy would love a seminar on trust. And so that may be a thing we do. We did a lot of these. I did a lot of these seminars during the COVID shutdowns, if anybody was watching those, and kind of got a little, to be honest, burnt out by it because we were doing so many. But now that we're on the other side of that, hopefully, happy to kind of bring this back because I enjoy putting these on. And it's a way to get out in front of more people and I can send out the replay. I'll do live seminars from time to time, but then if you couldn't come at this hour and if you're, I'm at the Hotel Syracuse or something like that, you can't make it there, you miss it. So this gives me a way to continue interacting with people, and I enjoy it. Cindy has a great question. If you put your house in the trust, do you still receive property tax discounts for seniors? It's a great question, Cindy. Thank you. And the answer is yes. You're still eligible for STAR exemption, Senior STAR, Enhanced STAR, VA. There's a VA exemption if you're a military member or veteran. All of those property tax exemptions stay in place with the type of trust that we do. So that's a great question. You also will keep one of the things that not a lot of folks know about. When I pass away, right? If I leave my house to my kids and they sell it, they may have to pay tax on that sale. If it's not their primary residence, they may pay capital gains tax on that sale. The type of trust we use and the planning we do eliminates that tax for the kids. So this is a little different than if you just gave your house to your kids today. A lot of people will read about or come in and ask, should I just give my house to my kids? And one of the things you lose if you just deed your house to your children now, besides losing total control over what happens with it, is you may potentially lose that what's called step up in basis, which is how we would avoid capital gains tax for the kids when you pass away. You may potentially lose that step up in basis. So that's another kind of silver lining that we get through having the irrevocable trust. That's a great question, though. Is it typical to only put the house in the trust so that the parent can still access other assets for living expenses? It is typical. I will sit with someone and we go through everything that they own. House, bank accounts, investments, 401k, life insurance, annuities. And we cherry pick what makes the most sense. The house is usually the low-hanging fruit because parent can still sell their house if it's in a trust. They'll keep control of it. They'll keep the tax exemptions as we just talked about. So there's no downside. Besides the cost of doing it, there's no downside. And so then it just kind of depends on what their other assets look like. I'll typically, for example, like if I have a husband and wife, cash and stocks, up to $100,000 outside of the trust, you're fine. Because of the Medicaid rules and how we get someone eligible for Medicaid, if you're married, up to $100,000 is great outside of the trust. If you're single or a widow, $30,000 to $50,000 is the kind of the sweet spot outside of the trust. So it really just depends, and I'll sit and spend time going through and looking at bank statements and financial statements with the clients. The house becomes kind of the easy, conceptually easy part, and then we kind of build from there to see if it makes sense to add anything else to the trust. Justin, can the government come after children's assets? Do kids need to make a trust to protect themselves? So we do not have the joys of being downtown, a little horn honking 7:30. We do not have what would be called filial responsibility laws in New York. So children do not have legal responsibility for their parents' medical debts. Husbands and wives have obligations for each other, so that's something to be aware of if you're married. But there's no responsibility that you're going to be personally financially liable for your parents' debts. There's a slight kind of caveat to that where if you're power of attorney for your parents and you've mismanaged or like stolen some of their taken some of their money, you may be personally financially liable. But again, that's like a very small wrinkle to that issue. But that's a good question. Oh, Nan, thank you so much. We get a little positive review. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yeah, happy to help. So we're going to, I'll take any more questions and hang out for a little while longer, certainly. I appreciate you guys being with us tonight. It's a crisp autumn evening here in central New York. I will send this out. If you're watching this now on replay, you probably received it by email from me tomorrow, Thursday, September 28th. Certainly respond to me or email with any questions, comments, concerns. If you're interested in any type of estate planning services, we are ready, willing, and able to assist you guys with that process. Again, make sure you enter our very fun, I love doing these giveaways, and it's been a while since our last one, 5 all-clad slow cooker giveaway. We have fun with this. And more to come too. Certainly, as we ramp up here in the holiday season, we are we tend to have a lot more activity towards the back end of the season here at the law firm. Certainly helping people as families get back together over the holidays. Our work tends to pick up, so we'll get very busy, kind of after Thanksgiving, and definitely after Christmas things ramp up in terms of families, had these conversations, and now the parents or the kids are going to take some action. So always happy and ready to help folks. Feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for joining tonight. We've got some great little last comments here. Justin, thank you. Thank you so much. It's great for my family too. Happy to help. Michelle, great idea for this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate you. Appreciate you watching. And last but not least, we've got one of my kids saying, "Hi, Dad." Hi, buddy. If this is Nino, he's our 6-year-old. It is time for bed, and Dad's coming home soon. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.